Hey, it's Monday morning. This is Chuck Dixon back again for another episode of Whatcha Watchin, where me, a professional comic book writer, talk about the movies and TV shows that I like. I get so many questions about movie and TV shows on my Ask Chuck Dixon show that I decided to do a little offshoot, a spin-off, as it were. And this week, I'm going to concentrate on Netflix, and I'm really going to concentrate on one show they have on. I guess it's a one shot. It's it's a show about movie cliches, and as you can see, hosted by Rob Lowe. And Rob delves into the world of tiresome, tedious, hackneyed scenes that we see over and over again in movies presented to you by creators who lack imagination. The show is a review of a lot of the crap and vapid nonsense we see in movies today. It runs off quite a number of them. My only problem with the show is Rob Lowe does what he can hosting the show. The writing's a little too cute, a little too snarky. It seems to be aimed at internet haters. But it does a pretty good job, but sometimes it just confuses cliches with tired writing. And the people who made it don't seem to have a really deep well of knowledge about cinema history, and they go with pretty much a lot of very obvious things, and they deal a little bit with the de-evolution of movies post the introduction of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is pretty good. And they do a kind of a neat examination of the Wilhelm scream, and I actually learned something I didn't know about the Wilhelm scream. If you don't know anything about if you don't know the Wilhelm scream, trust me, you've heard it a million times. When Luke and Leia are in Star Wars are in that trench inside the Death Star, and just before Luke swings Leia across that chasm, the first stormtrooper he shoots falls into the chasm and screams, and that's the Wilhelm scream, and it comes from it's a sound effect track that began in the 50s and is used mostly to be ironic. It shows up everywhere. Tarantino uses it a lot. Lucas and Spielberg use it a lot. It shows up. It's in Toy Story when Buzz falls off the windowsill. So if you don't know about the Wilhelm scream, this show will explain the history of it. And as I said, told me something I didn't know. I had the origins of the Wilhelm scream wrong. But anyway, they get into a lot of common tropes and repeated stuff. But as I said, they don't really they don't get to the heart of things. I mean, it's meant to be, I guess, funny. It's kind of a clickbait kind of show. It's about as shallow as a meme for the most part. I think it would be better to have some actual auteur filmmakers come on and probably ruin their careers by delving deeper into what cliches are, why we find them so tiresome, and who's really at fault, and who really is at fault. Generally, movie cliches I'm going to lay at the doorstep of film producers who don't have any new ideas, but they remember a lot of bad ideas. or they remember a lot of great ideas that they have no understanding of why they're great. And it's like, well, hey, it worked in Gladiator. Let's just use it here, without considering that the scene they're talking about in Gladiator had lots of setup, was well crafted, expertly produced, well thought out, and a logical part of the ongoing story. And I'm just using Gladiator as an example. The producers will lift from all kinds of sources. The David Mamet once said that a producer would tell him the gist of an idea of what the producer wanted. Mamet would come back with his efforts, and the producer would say, "This isn't what I envisioned." To which Mamet would say, well, you didn't envision anything. That was my job. If you could have envisioned this, you would have written it yourself, not me. You needed me to envision it. You just don't like this. But it's not like it runs contrary to what you described to me before I set off to write. So yeah, I just lay this down to, and producers love cliches because it's conservation of risk. They think that if the audience has already seen it and liked it, well, they'll like it again and again and again and again and again. It's just this safe way. It's like the bumpers at the bowling alley when the little kids are bowling. It's like, let's keep the ball in the alley. Let's keep the story going the way people expect it to go, and we'll just, stack up all the nonsense. But generally, this show really wasn't. It was about cliches, and it dealt with cliches, but what it really was about was why movies suck now. Because almost all the examples were from recent films. And they even used Die Hard as an example. Now, the first Die Hard film is at least grounded in reality to a good degree. I'll get into a little bit more. I'll get into a very exact example of that coming up. But over the course of the Die Hard films, anybody who watches them, they get more and more ridiculous. Till finally, in the final Die Hard film, there's at least 20 instances in that movie where Bruce Willis would have died instantly. But because of the advent of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that every action film hero has to be a superhero now, even, even 60-year-old Bruce Willis, that's the way it is now. So it's stupid, it's dumbed down, it's ridiculous, it's ludicrous, it's no longer believable. And, an excellent action film like Die Hard has basically, been rendered idiotic. The series, the franchise. The first film is excellent. I like the third film as well. The second film is the one where it all begins to fall apart. But this is where we are today. Just everything made stupid. And a lot of the examples, or the excuse that a lot of producers use is, well, we have an international market now. Does that imply that people overseas are dumber than Americans? I don't think so. I really don't. And I kind of hope it'll all turn around and audiences will begin rewarding smarter films and staying away from the drivel that's coming out. I suspect a course correction is in order or will be coming soon because the Chinese market is collapsing for the American studios as the Chinese bar a lot of American films or limit their distribution. So the cash flowing out of China, the gold rush to make films to appease China, that's over as the Chinese are basically have ramped up their own production schedule and are making their own movies for their own populace. And as they did before, barring, Western filmmakers from distributing and displaying and exhibiting in China. So film producers here are going to have to start rethinking about that audience and start trying to appeal to the audience they used to have before China opened its gates to them. Now, this show, the one with Rob Lowe, wisely points out Scream as a movie that sort of broke the cliches. It broke all the expectations of horror film fans. It took the horror movie and stood it on its head a bit and played with the audience's expectations. Having, setting up scenes where they thought it knew where it was going and then defying those expectations and it, in a very delightful way so that Scream was, became a franchise of its own, made buckets of money because Scream proved that moviegoers aren't stupid. Moviegoers understand the language of film. They know a tired, tedious story when they see one, and they will reward a story that not only is better than the usual tripe, but actually mocks the other poorer examples that they've stayed away from. And on top of all that, except for Scream 3, the Scream movies are highly entertaining entries in a genre, as well as, playing with it, having fun with it, not laughing at it, but laughing with it. Where I differ from the people that made this special is they kind of give short shrift to Psycho. where they laud the fact that Drew Barrymore dies at the beginning of the Scream film, because a lot of film goers, not me necessarily, but a lot of film goers thought Drew Barrymore was going to be the star of the film. I didn't. I wasn't that surprised. I mean, maybe some people were. Much more surprising was Alfred Hitchcock, I hate to spoil this for you, killing off Janet Leigh in the first 20 minutes of the film. He sets up a embezzlement robbery thing, and it was very much like an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And Janet Leigh is on the run with a bunch of money that isn't hers. And you think that the story is going to be about her. And Janet Leigh was a big star, much bigger star in her day than Drew Barrymore. Sorry, Drew. Drew's great. Janet Leigh was a bigger star. She was big box office. And audiences must have been literally dumbstruck when she dies in a horribly vicious and obviously very final way in the first 20 minutes in the famous shower sequence. And there's no Janet Leigh for the rest of the movie. That's cliche busting, buddy. That's how you break a cliche. But this special kind of gives short shrift to Psycho for some reason. And when they're talking about cliche busting and trope busting and defying expectations in horror films, they never once bring up Cabin in the Woods, the sort of meta response to all horror movies of all time, where the movie attempts to explain that there are rules in a horror film and they're real. They're set in place for a purpose. And this movie kind of takes all of the horror movie cliches to their, ultimate destination in a quite unforgettable action climax at the end of this film. So, to ignore that movie, I don't know, maybe they had it in for them. A number of cliches they missed, though, that ones that really bug me. One of them is the guy lurking in the back seat, the killer lurking in the back seat. Have you ever gotten in your car and someone was hiding in the back seat and you didn't know it? No, I don't think so. Maybe in this day and age where you hear reports, report after report of parents leaving their children to die in the backseat of cars. I mean, maybe we're just that forgetful or unobservant or oblivious now. Although I have children and I can't for the life of me imagine getting out of my car, going into work and leaving the kids for 8 hours in the backseat of the car and never giving them another thought, completely forgetting they were there. I mean, even when I was driving, I would constantly check the rearview mirror to make sure they were there. How would you forget them? I go off on a tangent. I just think it's ridiculous that a guy, look at this guy, he's a monster, he's huge, he's got an axe, and he was hiding in the back seat and she didn't know it, she never heard it. He wasn't breathing, he wasn't panting, he wasn't rustling around. She had no reason to ever go to the back seat. I mean, I open the rear door all the time to put groceries in and stuff like that. I should write that into a story where a guy's lurking in the back seat and they open the back door and put the groceries in. So his little plan fails. The other one that's ridiculous is everyone who jumps off a building, they can jump 3 or 4 stories. They land in a convenient dumpster. Often they land in a dumpster they didn't know was there in the first place. I don't know if these people who write this stuff have ever seen a dumpster. They're not all filled with feathers and packing peanuts. You may very well land on a dumpster filled with fluorescent light bulbs or steel rods or copper piping. That would end your trip real soon. I mean, that'd be a 30-minute movie right there. The hero dies in a dumpster. I'd pay to see that one. If the movie was 15 minutes long, I'd be happy to see the hero fall into a dumpster and die, because that's stupid. Jump into a dumpster. It's like when the characters conveniently leap off an overpass, and there's always a truck passing by underneath, filled with foam rubber. Another one is when people crash through the exterior glass of a building, office building or whatever. This was addressed in Die Hard. Remember, Bruce Willis goes flying through the glass, but he shoots the glass first. and because this is a skyscraper, it would have highly tempered glass to stand up to hurricane winds. You're not just going to leap through it. you're going to crash into it and knock yourself unconscious. And in Die Hard, at least they address this by having him, unload a clip from an MP5 to weaken the glass so that he can bust through it, and also show that he got all cut up and bleeding. He suffers a lot from. That's the most gruesome parts of Die Hard is his lacerations from broken glass, which you never see in movies like this. You might see a one sexy little scar under the character's eye, just at the top of their cheekbone, to show the results of jumping through a plate glass of window. Now, interior glass, different thing. Exterior glass, it's silly. It's really silly. I mean, at least have them, pound on the glass a while with a piece of furniture or something to make these kind of scenes somewhat believable. And also, it's just tired. We see it all the time. If there's plate glass in a scene and it's an action movie, someone's going through it, and so it's no longer surprising or delightful. People pointing guns at each other for extended periods of time. This never happens in real life. When people pull guns, they either don't shoot at all or they start shooting right away. You pull a gun, and the other guy pulls a gun. You're shooting. You're shooting crazy. You're shooting wild. Recent video from Washington D.C. and New York City and Chicago show us this. Real life gun battles. They're scooting around. They're ducking. They're diving. They're walking around like Groucho Marx, firing blind at everything that moves. And this kind of stuff never happens. It's tired. It's silly. It's a cliche, heavily borrowed from Hong Kong action films, and the reason it's in so many Hong Kong action films is I don't know why it's in so many Hong Kong action films, but I know that the audience of Hong Kong action films love it. I've seen any number of Chow Yun-fat movies and Jackie Chan movies at theaters in various Chinatowns, and the scene where the hero and the villain are holding guns at each other's head never fails to make the entire audience gasp. So there's a reason why they do it, because audiences find it endlessly fascinating. But it's just become tiresome in Western films to just copy that trope. Another one we can thank Butch and Sundance for. Butch Cassidy Sundance Kid had the justifiably famous cliff jumping scene, which was marvelously set up. It's very suspenseful, and it's funny. But then Butch and Sundance are being chased by a posse, and their last opportunity to escape them is to leap from a cliff into some whitewater rapids, and then the whitewater rapids carry them away. The leaping from the cliff into whitewater rapids sequence happens in so many movies, it's crazy. I know as a writer, sometimes you need to get your good guys away from the bad guys, and you need it to be in a hurry. And you need to, inexorably separate your two groups of characters from one another, because this isn't the point at which you want them to meet for the final showdown. It's a chase thing. They escape near capture and everything else. But my God, come up with something else other than jumping into whitewater rapids. It's you see it so many times. You're probably not even aware of why you're so bored with it, because it's any wilderness setting story that involves a chase, someone's going to fall into whitewater rapids in order to escape from the bad guys. Even the Coen brothers have indulged this cliche. It's in No Country for Old Men, but their scene is so well set up and so well blocked out and perfectly suspenseful, much like the scene in Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. See, that's the thing. You can use a cliche if you set it up in a clever way and use it in a different way than it's been used before. If you can polish a turd, but you got to know what you're doing. And most filmmakers, and more precisely most film producers, they've lost the craft. They have no idea. There's no Daryl Zanucks anymore who actually know how movies work and know what audiences want and know how to thrill and delight audiences in a new way. So they just keep using the same old ways over and over and over again because it's easy and they can get to lunch earlier. The other one I really hate, and I've been guilty of this a few times, but I'm a comic book writer. I'm not paid the kind of money screenwriters are written. The scene where the good guy or good guys are, they've come upon the villain's lair and they're eavesdropping and they show up just in time to hear the bad guys review every aspect of their evil plan. They don't show up and hear them talking about lunch or the game last night or the weather or, last year's annual report or a profit and loss statement. No, it's a perfect layout. I mean, the most famous scene I can think of this is Bond spying on Auric Goldfinger when Goldfinger lays out his plan for robbing Fort Knox. But even that scene is great because, first of all, it's Bond, so you excuse a lot with Bond. Secondly, it's well set up, and it's logical because Bond realizes that Goldfinger is having a meeting with all of these crime figures from all over the United States, and they ain't going to be talking about what's for lunch. He knows this is going to be an important meeting. This is where Goldfinger, he wants to know what Goldfinger has to say to these guys and what they have to say to him. So at least it makes some sense that he shows up at the right time. He showed up at the right meeting. But so many times in movies, the good guy arrives just in time to hear all the pertinent details that he needs to hear, and the audience needs to hear as well. And it's kind of tired. I mean, why not have the guy get in his eavesdropping spot and fall asleep because what the bad guys are talking about is so dull, or they're not talking at all, and he only awakens when they start talking about their nefarious plans. I mean, that would make a lot more sense, be a lot more believable, be a lot more relatable. But what do I know? Oh, all right. But I'm going to leave you with one recommendation, also on Netflix. It's a Netflix production, and it is totally free of cliches, totally free of tiresome tropes. It's called Hold the Dark. It's a film by Jeremey Saunier. If you've seen Green Room or Blue Ruin, you have an inkling of what you are in for with this movie. It features Jeffrey Wright and Alexander Skarsgård. Wright is a wildlife writer and apparently professional hunter who is called upon to come up to Alaska to investigate the death and disappearance of a 6-year-old boy. Now, any film that begins with a child being torn apart by wolves, you know you're in for something a little different. If you like Taylor Sheridan movies, think 10 times darker, and that's Hold the Dark. It's a fascinating film. It is not the feel-good movie of the year. It's nobody's idea of a date night movie, but it is absolutely fascinating. And Saunier, who's nowhere near as prolific a director and writer as I wish he was, creates this dark, dismal world set against this awesome scenery, the awesome scenery of Alaska, in which the petty doings of this, little group of people, this little group of tortured, tormented, but highly relatable people, it's thrown into stark relief. And it's just a fascinating movie. But again, I warn you, it's very, very grim. I had a number of people who were actually angry at me for recommending this movie to them. And for anybody who thinks that Netflix only presents lightweight fare, well, here's one prime example of how they step away from the norm and give a true auteur, writer, director free rein to create something very special, but as I said, very dark. I don't mean phony, quasi dark. I mean, yeah, don't watch this one right before bedtime. That's all I got to say. So that's what I've been watching, and I promise next time I'll do at least 4 different things. But I wanted to get into that Rob Lowe cliche show, which you should watch. It's fun. It's good for a few giggles, but I just don't think it delved deep enough. I like to see a series, and I like to see it hosted by somebody a little more serious about the topic. Hey, support good comics. If you go to patreon.com, Arkhaven Comics, it's the Chuck Dixon Slush Fund. It's how I finance different projects I'm doing at ArcTunes. ArcTunes, which is a free digital comic service in high res. It's a brand new comics platform. Dozens and dozens of series and more joining us. We're going to be joined by a lot of new independent producers soon. It's just chock full. I swear to you, with all my heart, that you visit there and look around, you're going to find something that you want to follow every week. And to help me pay my starving artists on my various creator-owned projects there, I'm using a Patreon account. So if you go to Patreon, Arkhaven Comics, you can help me out with $1, $3, $5, whatever you can spare. And that's about it for me this week. I'll see you all down the road.